The stars above Earth suddenly shifted as massive shapes blocked out their light, and the moon itself seemed small compared to the alien ships that appeared in the darkness of space around it. Admiral Hyun-sik stood on the bridge of Defense Station, Alpha watching the enemy fleet through the main view screen, and he counted over 3,000 vessels of sizes that made Earth's largest battleships look like toys, and the ships were beautiful in a terrible way, with hulls that gleamed like black, mirrors and weapons that pulsed with energy that could crack planets. Lieutenant Soo-jin turned from her communications console with her face pale, but her eyes steady as she spoke to the Admiral and said that they were receiving a transmission on all frequencies from the alien fleet, and the message was being broadcast to every nation on Earth simultaneously. The main screen flickered and changed to show a creature that stood 9 feet tall with 4 arms and skin that looked like living metal, and its voice came through the speakers in perfect English, though it had never spoken to humans before, and this fact alone should have been terrifying. The alien spoke and said that it was Ambassador Vextar of the Galactic Council Hegemony, and that humanity had been watched and judged and found to be a threat to the stability of the galaxy, and that their rapid expansion and technological growth could not be allowed to continue. Vexatar continued speaking and explained that 47 civilizations had already fallen before the Council's might, and that resistance was not only futile, but would result in the complete sterilization of Earth and every human colony in space, and that this was not a negotiation, but a final ultimatum. The ambassador raised one of its 4 hands, and a hologram appeared showing the destruction of other worlds and cities burning and populations fleeing, and entire planets cracking apart under the assault of Council weapons, and Vextar said that this was the fate of all who defied the Council's will. Soo-jin looked at Admiral Hyun-sik and saw something that surprised her, because instead of fear or despair, she saw the corners of his mouth turning upward in what could only be called a smile, and other officers on the bridge noticed it too and began to exchange glances. Vexatar's message continued and stated that humanity had exactly 72 hours to surrender unconditionally and prepare for relocation to designated worlds where they would serve the Council in whatever capacity was deemed appropriate, and that failure to comply would result in immediate and total annihilation. The transmission ended, and the bridge fell silent except for the hum of the station's systems, and Admiral Hyun-sik turned to face his crew, and his smile had grown wider, and he said that they should prepare to send a message to Earth Command and tell them that the waiting was finally over. Down on Earth's surface, President Do-yoon sat in the emergency bunker beneath the Capitol building, and around the table were the leaders of every major nation and the head of the Global Defense Council, and they had all heard the alien ultimatum and seen the massive fleet that hung in space above them. Defense Minister Bo-ram stood at the head of the table with a tablet in her hands, and she began to explain their options, which seemed limited to either surrender or fight against impossible odds, and the alien fleet could destroy every city on Earth within minutes if they chose to do so. But President Do-yoon held up his hand for silence and asked Minister Bo-ram to contact Dr. Tae-ho immediately and bring him to the meeting because there were things that needed to be discussed that had been kept secret, even from most of the world's leaders. 20 minutes later, Dr. Tae-ho entered the bunker, and he was a small man with gray hair and tired eyes. But when he spoke, his voice was steady and confident, and he said that the Prometheus project was ready, and had been ready for over 6 months. The world leaders looked confused because none of them had heard of any Prometheus project, and President Do-yoon explained that some secrets had been kept, even from them, because the fewer people who knew, the better the chances of success would be. Dr. Tae-ho activated a holographic display in the center of the table and showed them images that made their eyes widen in surprise, because the images showed construction projects that spanned decades and technologies that seemed impossible, and preparations that had been hidden across the entire solar system. The doctor explained that humanity had known this day would come ever since the first alien probe had been detected at the edge of the solar system over 90 years ago, and that every action taken since then had been leading to this moment. He showed them the truth about the orbital defense platforms that everyone thought were simple military installations, but were actually something far more sophisticated, and he showed them the real purpose of the moon-based construction projects that had been ongoing for 30 years. Minister Bo-ram stared at the holographic images and asked how such massive construction could have been hidden from the world's governments, and Dr. Tai-Ho smiled and said that it hadn't been hidden from governments, but had been disguised as other projects that served dual purposes. President Do-Yun stood and walked to the holographic display and pointed to one particular image that showed a structure built inside a hollowed-out asteroid, and he said that the alien fleet had made one crucial mistake in their calculations about human capabilities. The mistake was assuming that humans had remained, the same species that the Council had first observed decades ago, and that humanity's greatest strength had always been adaptation and learning from others, and the Council had unknowingly provided the greatest education in galactic technology that any species had ever received. Dr. Tai-Ho touched a control, and the hologram changed to show star charts with marked locations throughout the galaxy, and he explained that humanity had not been idle during the Council's expansion, and that every world the aliens conquered had taught humans something new about their technology and tactics. The alien wars of conquest had been observed and recorded and analyzed by human agents who had infiltrated Council space using stolen technology, and the knowledge gained had been used to prepare defenses that the Council could not imagine. Minister Boram asked how many people knew about these preparations, and President Do-Yun said that millions of humans had worked on various parts of the project, but only a few hundred knew the complete scope and purpose of what they were building. The bunker's communication system activated, and Admiral Hyun-Sik's voice came through the speakers asking for permission to implement Protocol 7, and President Do-Yun looked around the table at the faces of the world's leaders and saw fear mixed with hope. He walked back to his chair and sat down slowly before speaking into the microphone and saying that Protocol 7 was authorized, and that it was time to show the galaxy what humanity had become during their years of apparent weakness. Far above Earth's surface, the alien fleet continued to hold position around the moon, and aboard the Council ships the various species celebrated their easy victory over another primitive world, and they began to make plans for the division of Earth's resources and population. But on the human orbital stations and hidden bases throughout the solar system, people like Captain Minho and Engineer Hyojin began activating systems that had been dormant for years and running final checks on equipment that represented the greatest secret in human history. The 72-hour countdown had begun, and while the aliens waited for humanity's surrender, the humans were preparing to deliver the greatest surprise in the history of galactic warfare, and Admiral Hyun-Sik's smile grew wider as he watched the alien fleet and knew that they had no idea what was coming. Fleet Commander Zefkar stood in the command center of the Council flagship and looked out at the primitive blue world that hung in space before them. And he felt nothing but contempt for the species that lived there, because in his 300 years of military service he had never encountered a civilization so pathetically unprepared for galactic contact. The human orbital platforms were visible through the ship's advanced sensors, and they appeared to be nothing more than basic defense installations with primitive kinetic weapons and simple energy shields that could barely deflect asteroid impacts, and Zefkar wondered why the Council had even bothered to send such a massive fleet against such weak opponents. Behind him, the representatives of the various Council species gathered around the strategic planning table, and their conversations filled the air with the sounds of different languages and communication methods as they discussed the coming conquest of Earth. The crystalline, Vorthlan entities spoke through harmonic vibrations that translated into words, and their leader, Kristvar, expressed satisfaction that another young species would be brought under Council control before they could develop technologies that might threaten the established order. The militaristic Krex delegation stood at attention in their powered armor, and their war speaker Brutkanos declared that the humans showed promise as soldiers and might serve well in the Council's armies once their independent spirit was properly broken through training and discipline. The ancient Velthari psionics remained silent as always, but their mental emanations carried feelings of mild curiosity about human brain structure and whether their minds could be molded to serve as useful psychic amplifiers for Council operations. Zefkar turned away from the viewport and addressed the assembled representatives and told them that human resistance would likely last no more than a few hours once. The demonstration bombardment began, and that their technology was at least 2 centuries behind even the most basic Council standards. He activated the holographic display table and showed them detailed scans of Earth's military installations and pointed out the laughably small number of ships in Earth's space navy and the primitive nature of their weapons systems, which still relied primarily on chemical propulsion and nuclear fusion. The Krek's war speaker examined the display and noted that human weapons appeared to be designed for fighting other humans rather than galactic-level threats, and that their largest nuclear weapons could barely scratch the hull of a Council Scout ship. Kristvar's harmonic voice asked about human population centers and whether the species showed signs of the rapid technological development that made younger civilizations dangerous, and Zefkar replied that humans had made some progress in recent decades, but nothing that approached Council capabilities. The fleet commander touched a control, and the display changed to show the timeline of human development, and he explained that their space program was less than a century old, and their understanding of faster-than-light travel was purely theoretical. He pointed to various human achievements and dismissed them as primitive accomplishments that every species eventually developed, and said that humans had not even begun to understand the fundamental forces that powered Council technology. The Velthari mind speaker finally projected thoughts that reached every being in the room and conveyed the message that human minds were simple and direct, without the complex psychic defenses that older species developed, and that they would be easy to control once conquered. Zefkar nodded and said that the humans had been observed for several decades and showed no signs of developing beyond their current technological level, and that their society was too divided and chaotic to mount any significant resistance. Meanwhile, on Earth's surface, Captain Minho walked through the corridors of what appeared to be a standard military base, but was actually the control center for humanity's greatest secret, and he checked the status boards that showed systems coming online across the solar system. The evacuation of non-essential personnel from the orbital stations was proceeding according to plan, and the aliens would see exactly what they expected to see, which was humans fleeing in panic from their superior technology, and firepower engineer Hyejin worked at a console deep underground and made final adjustments to systems that had been disguised as mining equipment and geological research stations, and she smiled as each system reported ready status because the aliens had no idea what they were really looking at. In the hidden facility beneath the Pacific Ocean, Admiral J. Wan commanded a fleet that officially didn't exist, and his ships were powered down and hidden beneath layers of stealth technology that made them invisible to Council sensors. His crews had trained for this moment for over 20 years, and every officer and enlisted person understood that the fate of humanity depended on their ability to remain undetected until the proper moment came to reveal themselves. The alien deadline continued to count down, and across the Earth millions of people went about their daily lives while secretly preparing for the greatest battle in human history, and the news broadcasts showed panicked crowds and government officials calling for calm. But beneath the surface of apparent chaos, the real preparations continued, and every system that the aliens dismissed as primitive served a dual purpose that would soon become clear to the invaders. Fleet Commander Zefkar received regular reports from his reconnaissance ships, and each report confirmed that human military forces were deploying exactly as expected, with their most powerful ships moving to defensive positions around their orbital installations. The humans appeared to be preparing for a conventional space battle, which would last approximately 17 minutes against Council firepower, and Zefkar almost felt sorry for them because they clearly had no understanding of what they faced. His tactical officer reported that human communications were increasing in frequency and intensity, which suggested growing panic among their leadership, and that several human colonies in other star systems were sending desperate messages to Earth asking for evacuation assistance. The fleet commander told his staff that human desperation was natural and expected, and that their scattered colonies would be dealt with after Earth surrendered, and that the humans would learn to serve the Council just as 47 other species had learned before them. In the Council ship's medical bay, the species scientists discussed the upcoming acquisition of human biological samples, and debated whether humans would be suitable for genetic modification programs or whether they should be kept in their original form as manual laborers. The crystalline Vorthalon entities calculated the energy requirements for relocating Earth's population to the designated worlds and determined that approximately 60% of humans would survive the transportation process, which was considered acceptable losses. War Speaker Brutiknos reviewed the tactical data one more time and confirmed that no human weapon system could penetrate Council shields, and that their primitive nuclear weapons would be absorbed by the flagship's defensive grid without causing any damage. As the 72nd hour approached, Fleet Commander Zefkar prepared to send the final demand for surrender, and he expected to receive either a message of complete capitulation or desperate pleas for mercy from the human leadership. Instead, the communication that came from Earth contained only 4 words spoken by President Do-Yun in a calm and steady voice, and those words were, "We decline your offer." And then the transmission ended, leaving the Council commanders staring at their screens in surprise. Zefkar felt a moment of confusion, because in his 3 centuries of military service, no species had ever simply declined a Council ultimatum without at least attempting to negotiate terms or beg for more time. He turned to his communications officer and ordered him to send another message to Earth, demanding clarification of their response and threatening immediate consequences for their defiance of Council authority. But before the message could be transmitted, every sensor on every Council ship began detecting energy readings from Earth that made no sense according to their understanding of human technology, and the readings were growing stronger by the second. The tactical displays showed power levels building across Earth's surface and orbital installations that exceeded anything the humans should have been capable of generating. And Zefkar felt the first stirring of unease as he realized that something was very wrong with their intelligence about human capabilities. Fleet Commander Zefkar wasted no time in responding to humanity's refusal, and he ordered his most powerful dreadnoughts to begin the demonstration bombardment that would show the humans the futility of resistance, and within seconds, massive energy beams lanced out from the Council ships toward Earth's major cities. The beams were designed to crack continents and boil oceans, and had been used to destroy the homeworlds of dozens of species who had dared to defy the Council's will, and Zefkar watched with satisfaction as the deadly energy raced toward the blue planet. But something impossible happened as the beams approached Earth's atmosphere, because instead of striking the planet's surface, the energy simply stopped, as if it had hit an invisible wall, and the beams spread out across an enormous barrier that encompassed the entire world. Every alien on every Council ship stared at their displays in shock, because the energy readings they were seeing defied everything they knew about defensive technology, and the barrier around Earth was absorbing weapons fire that could destroy planet's war speaker Brutknos shouted orders to his gunnery crews to increase power and focus all weapons on a single point of the barrier. But even the combined firepower of 50 Council dreadnoughts could not penetrate whatever was protecting the human world. On the Council flagship, a new transmission began broadcasting from Earth, and the image that appeared on the main screen showed a human male standing in what appeared to be a laboratory, filled with technology that none of the aliens recognized. Dr. Yun-Woo looked directly into the camera and spoke in a calm voice that was translated into every Council language. And he said that the aliens had made several incorrect assumptions about humanity and their capabilities. He gestured to the equipment behind him and explained that humans had not been idle during the decades when the Council had been expanding across the galaxy, and that every species the aliens had conquered had taught humanity something valuable about galactic technology. The doctor activated a holographic display that showed the true nature of Earth's defenses, and the aliens watching could barely comprehend what they were seeing, because the orbital platforms they had dismissed as primitive were actually massive energy collection and focusing arrays. Dr. Yun-Woo continued speaking and said that the barrier protecting Earth was not just defensive, but was actually a lens that could focus and redirect energy in ways that the Council had never imagined, and that humanity had been preparing for this confrontation for over 90 years. He explained that every alien probe that had entered the solar system had been secretly captured and studied, and that human agents had infiltrated Council space using stolen technology to observe and learn from alien wars of conquest. The holographic display changed to show images of human observers at the sites of Council victories, and Dr. Yun-Woo said that humanity had watched the destruction of 47 civilizations and learned from each one how to avoid their mistakes. Meanwhile, on Defense Station Alpha, Admiral Hyun-Sik gave orders to his crew, and the orbital platforms that had seemed so insignificant to the aliens began to unfold and reconfigure themselves into massive structures that dwarfed even the largest Council ships. Lieutenant Sujin reported that all systems were showing green across the board and that the energy collectors were operating at maximum efficiency, and Admiral Hyun-sik smiled as he watched the alien fleet's confusion grow. The platforms were not weapons in the traditional sense, but were instead devices that could manipulate the fundamental forces of space itself, and the technology had been developed by studying the wreckage of alien ships and the energy signatures of Council weapons on Earth's surface. Major Young-soo coordinated the activation of ground-based installations that had been disguised as industrial facilities and research stations, and one by one, they emerged from their camouflaged positions to reveal their true purpose. The installations were connected by a network of energy conduits that ran beneath the planet's surface, and together they formed a planetary defense grid that could channel power from Earth's core itself. But the greatest surprise was yet to come, because the moon that the Council ships had been using as a reference point for their formation suddenly began to shift and change as massive sections of its surface moved aside to reveal artificial structures underneath. The lunar installations that humans had been building for decades were not mining operations or research facilities, but were actually the primary focusing array for humanity's defensive system, and the moon itself had been partially hollowed out and converted into a weapon. Dr. Yun-woo's broadcast continued, and he showed the aliens footage of human construction projects spanning multiple decades, and explained that every space mission and every scientific expedition had served a dual purpose in preparing for this day. He said that humanity's greatest advantage had always been their ability to learn and adapt, and that the Council's own technology had provided the foundation for human defenses that exceeded anything the aliens had ever encountered. The energy readings from Earth continued to climb, and the Council's sensors detected power levels that should have been impossible for any single planet to generate, and Fleet Commander Zefkar realized that his fleet was no longer surrounding a helpless world, but was trapped with something far more dangerous than they had imagined. Admiral Hyun-sik opened a communication channel to the Council flagship, and his image appeared on Zefkar's main screen, and he spoke with the same calm confidence that had marked his earlier smile. He told the alien commander that humanity appreciated the education that the Council had provided over the decades, and that every species the aliens had conquered had contributed something to human understanding of galactic warfare. Admiral Hyun-sik explained that the mistake the Council had made was assuming that humans would remain static and unchanged, and that they had failed to understand that humanity's greatest strength was their ability to evolve and improve. He gestured toward his bridge crew and said that the humans the aliens were facing were no longer the same species that the Council had first observed, because they had used alien technology to enhance their own capabilities. The Admiral revealed that human genetic engineering and cybernetic enhancement programs had been ongoing for decades, and that the current generation of humans possessed capabilities that far exceeded their ancestors. Lieutenant Sujin reported that the dimensional fold generators were coming online, and that space around the Council fleet was beginning to show the first signs of distortion as reality itself started to bend according to human will. The technology had been developed from studying Velthari psionic techniques and Vorthalon crystalline energy manipulation and Krex military engineering, and the result was something that none of the alien species had ever imagined possible. Dr. Yun-woo's broadcast showed the aliens the truth about human space exploration and revealed that the colonies they thought they knew about were only the visible settlements, while hidden facilities throughout the galaxy had been observing and learning from Council activities. He explained that humanity had not just studied alien technology, but had improved upon it, and that human engineering had solved problems that had limited alien civilizations for millennia. The barriers around Earth began to shift and change, as the energy they had absorbed from the Council's weapons was redirected and focused into new configurations that turned the planet's defensive grid into something far more threatening. Admiral Hyun-sik told Fleet Commander Zefkar that humanity had learned about mercy from observing the Council's treatment of conquered species, and that they had decided to offer the aliens something that the Council had never given to others. He said that the choice was simple, and that the aliens could surrender and join a new galactic order based on cooperation instead of conquest, or they could continue fighting and discover just how far human evolution had progressed. The space around the Council fleet continued to distort as the dimensional fold generators reached full power, and Zefkar realized that his ships were being cut off from the rest of the galaxy, and that retreat was no longer possible. Admiral Yun-Sik's final words to the alien commander were delivered with the same smile that had marked the beginning of the confrontation, and he said that the Council's greatest mistake had been assuming that impossibility was a permanent condition instead of simply another problem for human engineers to solve. What happened next defied every principle of warfare that the Galactic Council had developed over thousands of years, because the human counterattack did not begin with massive weapons or overwhelming force, but with something far more subtle and terrifying. The Council ships suddenly detected small vessels appearing throughout their formation, but these ships had not approached from any direction that the aliens could track, and they seemed to simply materialize inside the fleet's defensive. Perimeter Captain Yuna commanded one of these phase-shift vessels, and she watched her tactical display as her ship moved through space in ways that violated the known laws of physics, and she smiled as she approached her target, which was one of the Council's most powerful dreadnoughts. Her ship did not fire any weapons, because it carried none of the energy cannons or missile systems that the aliens expected. Instead, her vessel extended what appeared to be communication arrays toward the enemy ship. The Krek's dreadnought's crew frantically tried to target the human ship, but their weapons could not lock onto something that existed partially outside normal space, and their defensive systems had no protocols for dealing with an enemy that could phase in and out of reality. Captain Yun-A's boarding specialist, Seong Min, led a team that transferred directly from their ship into the alien vessel without using airlocks or cutting through hulls, because human phase technology allowed them to simply step through solid matter. But they were not there to fight the alien crew in traditional combat, because their mission was something that the Council could not have imagined, and within minutes they had accessed the Dreadnought's central computer core. The Krek's warriors tried to stop them, but discovered that human enhancement technology had made their opponents faster and stronger than any baseline organic being, and the boarding team completed their mission before the aliens could mount an effective defense. Across the Council fleet, the same scene was repeated as human teams infiltrated ship after ship and gained access to their computer systems, and the aliens began to realize that the humans were not trying to destroy their vessels but were doing something far worse. On-Earth AI Ra sat in the control center of Project Oracle and watched as decades of preparation finally paid off, because the artificial intelligence she had helped create was not just a computer program but was a digital organism that had been designed to learn and adapt. The AI began infiltrating Council ship systems, and it did not simply hack into their computers, but instead learned how each alien technology functioned and then improved upon it in real time. Fleet Commander Zefkar watched in horror as his own ships began turning their weapons on each other because their targeting systems had been compromised and reprogrammed by an intelligence that understood their technology better than they did. The crystalline Vorthlan entities tried to use their harmonic communication systems to coordinate a response, but discovered that the human AI had learned their language and was sending false orders that caused their ships to disable their own defensive systems. Warspeaker Brutakanos shouted commands to his crews, but found that his orders were being countermanded by his own ship's computer, which had been convinced by the human AI that he was an enemy infiltrator who needed to be restrained. The Velthari psionics attempted to use their mental powers to disrupt human operations, but discovered that the phase shift technology that allowed human ships to move through space also protected human minds from psychic attack. Admiral J-Wan's hidden fleet finally revealed itself as stealth systems deactivated, and ships that had been invisible to Council sensors appeared throughout the solar system, and these vessels were larger and more advanced than anything the aliens had detected. The ships did not attack immediately, but instead moved into positions that completed a three-dimensional array around the Council fleet, and Admiral J-Wan gave the order to activate the Pandora System Chief Engineer, Hyunju, had spent 15 years working on the project that would change the nature of space warfare forever. And as she activated the final sequences, she felt pride in knowing that human engineering had achieved something that no other species had ever imagined. The space around the Council fleet began to fold and twist as the dimensional manipulation technology reached full power, and the aliens found themselves trapped in a pocket of altered reality that was cut off from the rest of the galaxy. Fold was not just a prison, but was a demonstration of human mastery over forces that the Council species had always considered beyond their understanding, and the aliens realized that they were no longer fighting a primitive species, but were facing beings who had transcended the normal limitations of physics. Fleet Commander Zefkar tried to contact his superiors in Council space, but discovered that communications were impossible because his fleet now existed in a dimensional bubble that was separate from normal space-time. His ship's sensors showed that the stars had disappeared and been replaced by a construct of human design that provided light and energy, but followed rules that the aliens could not comprehend. Dr. Yunwu's image appeared once again on the screens of every Council ship, and he explained that humanity had learned about dimensional manipulation from studying Velthari psionic techniques, but had developed the technology far beyond what the original creators had achieved. He showed the aliens recordings of human experiments that had taken place in hidden facilities throughout the galaxy and revealed that humans had been testing dimensional fold technology for over 30 years. The doctor said that the pocket dimension containing the Council fleet was completely stable and could exist indefinitely, but that the aliens inside it would remain cut off from their empire until they made a choice about their future. Meanwhile, on the space stations that the aliens had thought were being evacuated, Captain Minho supervised the final phase of humanity's revelation as the installations completed their transformation into something that dwarfed even the largest Council vessels. The stations were not separate structures, but were actually components of a single massive construct that had been disguised as multiple facilities, and when fully assembled, it formed a ship that was larger than many asteroids. Engineer Hayajin reported that all systems were functioning perfectly and that the megaship's artificial gravity generators and life support systems could accommodate representatives from every species in the Council fleet. The vessel was not designed for war, but for diplomacy, because humanity's plan had never been to destroy the Council, but to force them to accept a new paradigm for galactic civilization. Admiral Hyunsik addressed the Council fleet from the bridge of the megaship, and he explained that humanity had studied the records of every species the Council had conquered and had learned from their mistakes. He said that resistance had always failed because previous species had tried to fight the Council using the same methods and technologies that the aliens understood. But humanity had chosen a different path. The Admiral revealed that human strategy had been based on the principle that evolution never stops, and that any species could transcend their apparent limitations if they were willing to adapt and change. He told the alien commanders that their choice was simple and that they could accept humanity's offer of a new galactic order based on cooperation and mutual benefit, or they could remain in the dimensional fold until they changed their minds. Fleet Commander Zefkar realized that his mighty fleet had been defeated not by superior firepower, but by superior thinking, and that the humans had checkmated the Council before the first shot was fired. The aliens who had thought themselves the masters of the galaxy discovered that they were facing a species that had learned to treat impossibility as just another engineering challenge to be solved. 6 hours after the Council fleet had been trapped in the dimensional fold, General In-Su stood before a gathering of alien representatives in the main conference hall of humanity's megaship, and the atmosphere was tense as species who had ruled the galaxy for millennia tried to understand their new situation. The general was a woman who had spent her entire career preparing for this moment, and she spoke with calm authority as she explained the terms that humanity was offering to the former rulers of the galaxy. She said that the age of conquest and domination was over, and that any species who wished to join the new galactic order would be welcomed as equals rather than subjects, and that cooperation would replace the fear that had held the galaxy together for so long. Fleet Commander Zefkar sat with the other military leaders and struggled to accept that his invincible fleet had been neutralized without a single human casualty, and that the species he had considered primitive insects were now dictating terms to the Council. The crystalline Vorthlan entity called Kristhavar asked through harmonic vibrations how humanity expected to maintain order across the galaxy without the threat of force that had kept younger species from developing dangerous technologies. General In-Su smiled and explained that the human approach was based on the principle that knowledge and technology shared freely would benefit all species, and that fear and oppression only led to rebellion and eventual collapse. She activated a holographic display that showed the current state of Council space and pointed out the numerous rebellions and resistance movements that were draining resources and causing instability throughout the galaxy. The general said that humanity's intelligence networks had been monitoring these conflicts for decades, and that the Council's grip on power was already weakening before the confrontation with Earth had even begun. War Speaker Brutkanos of the Krex demanded to know what would happen to the Council's military forces and whether humanity intended to disarm the species who had built their societies around warfare and conquest. General In Su replied that the human plan included roles for every species based on their natural abilities, and that the Krex military expertise would be valuable in protecting trade routes and defending against external threats. She explained that the galaxy was vast and largely unexplored, and that there were dangers beyond the Council's current borders that would require the combined efforts of all civilized species to address. The youngest member of the Vorthlan collective mind was an entity called Kesara, who had been created only 50 years earlier, and who possessed a curiosity about new ideas that the older crystals had long ago abandoned. Kesara asked about the human educational systems and whether alien young would be permitted to study human technology and philosophy, and General In Su said that cultural exchange was one of the foundations of the new order. She revealed that human universities had already prepared programs designed for alien students, and that scholarships would be available for any species that wished to learn about human engineering and scientific methods. The Velthari mind speaker, called Yith Morin, projected thoughts that conveyed skepticism about human motives and suggested that the new rulers might simply be more subtle in their methods of control. General In Su addressed the concern directly and said that the difference between humanity and the Council was that humans had learned the value of diversity, and that suppressing other species ultimately weakened the entire galactic community. She showed the aliens' records of human history, including their own wars and conflicts, and explained that humanity had learned through bitter experience that cooperation produced better results than domination. President Do-Yun's image appeared on the main screen, and he addressed the alien representatives with the same calm confidence that had marked humanity's response to the original ultimatum. He announced that the dimensional fold containing the Council fleet would be dissolved within 24 hours, and that any species who wished to return to their home worlds would be free to do so. The president explained that humanity was not interested in ruling an empire, but wanted to create a confederation of equal partners who could work together to explore the galaxy and develop new technologies. He said that the Council's former territories would be administered by local governments chosen by the inhabitants of each world, and that humanity would provide assistance and protection, but would not interfere in internal affairs. Meanwhile, in the Fold dimension itself, the crews of the Council ships had been observing human technology, and many of them were beginning to understand that their former enemies possessed capabilities that exceeded anything they had imagined possible. Young officers from various species gathered in the recreational areas of their ships and discussed what they had witnessed, and some of them expressed excitement about the possibility of learning from human teachers. Admiral Wu Jin, who commanded the first integrated fleet of human and alien vessels, addressed the Council crews through their communication systems and invited volunteers to participate in joint training exercises. He explained that the new galactic order would require officers who understood both human and alien technologies, and that career opportunities would be available for those who demonstrated competence and commitment. Engineer Dabin led teams of human and alien scientists. In examining the Council's technology, and her reports showed that cooperation between species could produce innovations that neither group could achieve alone. Her research into Krex metallurgy and Vorthlan energy manipulation had already led to improvements in human ship design, and she predicted that combined research efforts would accelerate technological development across the galaxy. 3 months after the confrontation, Ambassador So Young opened the first embassy of the new Terran Alliance on the former Council capital world, and representatives from dozens of species attended the ceremony. She announced that the Age of Fear was ending, and that the galaxy's younger species would no longer need to hide their technological development or worry about Council retaliation. The ambassador revealed that humanity had already made contact with 17 species that had been hiding in the galaxy's outer regions, and that they had accepted invitations to join the Alliance 6 months after the battle that had changed the galaxy. Admiral Wu Jin stood on the bridge of the Alliance flagship and watched as human and alien crew members worked together to patrol space lanes that were now free from the threat of Council warships. His tactical officer was a young Krex warrior named Bektar, who had volunteered for cross-training and who had proven that cooperation could overcome centuries of mistrust between species. The navigation officer was a Vorthlan entity called Sephara, who had learned to interface directly with human computer systems and whose crystalline structure provided processing power that enhanced the ship's capabilities. Dr. Dobbin's Joint Research Station orbited a star that marked the boundary between former Council space and the unexplored regions beyond, and her teams included scientists from 12 different species working on projects that would have been impossible under the old order. The research included studies of dimensional manipulation that could lead to instantaneous travel across galactic distances and investigations into energy sources that could power civilizations for millions of years. When young aliens visited the research station and asked the human scientists how they had achieved what seemed impossible, the answer was always the same, and it reflected the philosophy that had made humanity's victory possible. The humans would smile and explain that they had simply refused to accept that anything was truly impossible, and that the key to overcoming any limitation was to study it carefully and then find a way around it. The galaxy that had been ruled by fear and conquest for thousands of years was learning to embrace curiosity and cooperation, and the species that had once demanded Earth's surrender were now working alongside humans to explore the infinite possibilities that the universe offered. In the end, the Council's greatest mistake had been assuming that humanity would remain the same species they had first encountered, and they had learned too late that evolution never stops, and that intelligence combined with determination could overcome any obstacle.